Hello and good afternoon. It wouldn't be a Zoom call if somebody didn't forget to unmute themselves. Hi, I am Mark Hayward and I'm the Associate Dean Academic in the Faculty of Graduate Studies. And I wanted to extend a warm welcome to everyone who has taken time today to join us for our fall GRADitude season. The GRADitude program, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it, provides recent graduates with the opportunity to learn and connect with fellow alumni. So an especially warm welcome to those of you that are new alumni now. So those of you who graduated recently, we officially welcome you to our 350,000 person extended family. So today's session is titled Thinking About Grad School. It's never too late, and that is true. This is a good time to be thinking about grad school. But before we begin our session, I wanted to begin by offering York's land acknowledgement. And although we aren't all in the same location, we recognize the many Indigenous nations that have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And I think it's particularly possible for those of you wherever you are to just take a moment and also learn a little bit about the territory where you find yourselves and the Indigenous peoples of that region. Now, on to today's roundtable. If at any time you need help with this experience or have questions about the content, want to ask us a question on the panel, or ask a general question about graduate studies, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So we're using the Q&A button, not the chat button. There's a team of people here ready to help you answer those questions. I am now, though, honored to introduce our alumni speakers. And I'm going to introduce them one by one. They will appear, and then I'm going to ask each of them to tell us a little bit about themselves. So our first panelist today is Rana Nasrazadani, Jason Robinson, Harwinder Singh, and Sarah Thompson. These are our four panelists today. So they've joined us now on our virtual stage, and I'm going to ask each of them to do a brief introduction. Tell us a little bit about where you are now, your current role, what you studied at York, and your fondest memory of student life, particularly grad student life would be wonderful. So we're going to start with Rana. So I'll pass it over to you, Rana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Rana Nasrazadani, and I'm a policy and program analyst at the Ministry of Education and a student at York's Masters of Public Policy, Administration, and Law program. And I graduated with my bachelor degree with honors in Human Rights and Equity Studies in 2020, and I will be graduating with my master's degree in 2022. And I have many fond memories of my times at York University. However, my fondest memories are chatting with amazing professors at York and also the wonderful student leadership opportunities that I've had at York. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. And please accept my apologies for mispronouncing your first name. I will not do so for the rest of the panel. Again, my apologies. Let's move now to Jason. Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Robinson. I graduated from the Business and Society program for undergrad in 2017, and I graduated from the Masters of Environmental Studies at the Faculty of Environmental Studies in 2019. Currently, I am the policy specialist for the Community Climate Council. On my little tagline, as I'm the youth program facilitator, I actually just left that role last Friday. So I was the youth program facilitator at EcoSource, and I'm also the co-founder/research and data lead for Gradient Spaces, which is a LGBTQ+ organization focusing on how to make tech equitable. So that is what I'm doing right now. And I say my fondest memories of York is I was very involved in a lot of the student organizations. So I was like involved the 2 years in the MES program as part of the Graduate Environmental Studies Student Association. Got to meet so much great friends during that program. I was like very involved in student governance during the times, both in undergrad and my master's, but very different sides of that. I got to experience that at York. So I found that being like a great experience, and the people that I have met throughout those years.
Thank you, Jason. That was really wonderful. Let's turn now to Harwinder. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Harwinder. So excited to be here today with all of you. So I attended York both for my undergrad degree and my graduate degree, where I specialized in human resources management. So I graduated with my undergrad in 2016 and then with my graduate degree in 2019. And currently I work for Ernst & Young as a global talent coordinator. And then in terms of my fondest memory at York, this is definitely a hard one. I built such great relationships with the students that were in the same program as me in the graduate program. And part of the reason was because we had these really long classes that lasted, 7 to 8 hours, where you're in the room with, key people for 7 to 8 hours. So inevitably you end up building these great relationships and these great bonds from, having to interact and spend such long periods of time together.
Thank you very much. And our final panelist, Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My pleasure to be here. I am a senior manager currently in disaster management for the Canadian Red Cross. So I've been quite busy through COVID managing all kinds of different aspects of emergencies, both for the pandemic and for natural disasters, such as fires and floods all over Ontario. I did my master's in disaster and emergency management at York with the graduation of 2016. I actually moved all the way from BC to do the program because it's one of only 2 in Canada that offer it at the master's level. So I was very privileged to be a part of that. And my fondest memories are definitely long nights writing essays and crunching numbers in the student lounge with all of the other participants of the program. We developed, like Harwinder, some really close bonds. It's actually quite a small program. And so we developed some really, really close friendships. And I actually still go camping with them every year in September. So I just came back from Algonquin Park with those same friends that I'm still seeing on a regular basis. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. What a wonderful sort of range of experiences, and also sort of current and past. So I think it really bodes well for our conversation. So thank each of you for your introductions. So I have some questions I'm going to ask you. These are the kinds of questions that I was sort of thinking about. I imagine somebody may be asking as they're considering whether or not or when to return to graduate school. And I'm going to ask them, but I also sort of want you to take the questions as you hear them. So I may be asking, but just sort of take them as you best understand them. I also want to say to our attendees, if there's something that sort of we're talking about that sort of strikes a chord with you and you have a question you want to ask, please do just keep in mind the Q&A is there for you. So please do share your questions with us. We'll be monitoring it. We'll keep an eye on that, and maybe we can work that into our conversation as we move forward. So the first thing I wanted to ask, and to take this in a broad sense, where were you in your career, in your life, however you choose to situate yourself when you applied to grad school? And what was it that spurred you to make a decision to go and do a master's, to return to school? So however you, or to continue in school if you were enrolled as an undergrad at the time. So where is it, and how did you sort of come to that decision? And maybe we can start here with you, Jason.
Yeah, it was very interesting because I actually thought I was going to go to grad school at the time when I first applied, and I think it was like a lot of times it started like when I went to the career fair. And I was like interested in I want to be a senior policy analyst. And I saw like the federal government were at there. And I said, what it takes to be a senior policy analyst? They said, a master's degree. I'm like, oh, really? And I'm just like, I think I would just like maybe just get it out of the way. So like with me, I went straight from undergrad to my master's. I actually basically decided I was going to go to grad school, I think like 2 months, a month and a half before the deadlines, which was very stressful. And yeah, it was just like kind of, and then it was like kind of deciding what I want to do, because like I did business and society, and business society is very interdisciplinary, and like my streams in that program was microeconomics, public policy, and the environment. And I was like kind of deciding what I want to do. And then I realized I kind of was very more into the environmental field, and I kind of want to expand my mind more into that, because I think it was like I kind of was focused on more of the socioeconomic side of the environment. I was like hoping more to expand more in like ecosystems, biodiversity, and all that kind of stuff, which the MES program was going to offer. And I like how the MES program was very like diverse in the types of topics that they were focusing on the courses. So that's why I applied for the MES program. I applied for 2 other universities. I didn't get into them, and so I was actually, I remember at the time I was in president of the Business Society Student Association. I was in my office looking at post-diploma stuff in the office, and my friend said, "I'm not gonna get to grad school. It's gonna be," it was just all that stuff. And then the next day I got the acceptance letter from York.
It's interesting to hear you think about that with that balance a little bit, that there is the desire to pursue the academic, but then there is sort of also thinking about sort of one's long-term goals, and it's often about moving between the two. Sarah, you're next on my list of people to prod to answer this question. I'm wondering if you maybe could talk a little bit about that, and then I kind of want to come back to something else that Jason said maybe after you've talked.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I was in a very different place than Jason when I was thinking about grad school. I had already been working for about 5 years after graduating at Simon Fraser University, don't tell anyone, in BC, where I had done a geography with honors degree. So very focused on community planning and creating safe environments and spaces within urban environments, as well as sort of natural geography and some other pieces. But I had been volunteering a lot on the side of the jobs that I was doing with some municipalities out there, including the city of Surrey for my internship for co-op. And it was the volunteering experience with disaster and emergency management that was really my passion. And I discovered through that volunteerism that you could actually do it as a job. So I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And when I was looking for programs, there were, as I said earlier, there were only 2 at the master's level. And actually, like Jason, I was being told quite often that for those management level jobs in municipal environments, even in disaster management, that master's degrees really were the gold standard. Like nobody was looking at anybody unless they had an advanced degree of some kind. And so those 2 things combined led me to York, and I didn't really look back from there, to be honest. The other program is in BC actually, but the reason that I chose York over Royal Roads, which is the other university that has a program, really was the in-person component of the classes and the ability to network and connect with not just the professional field, which York does a lot more of just generally, as well as specifically in the program itself than a lot of other universities, but also the cost and also the ability to meet a lot of other people with those interests, but from a variety of different professional backgrounds. We had a huge variety in our program of new, so students that had just come directly from a bachelor's and people who had been in the field working for some time. So it was great diversity of thought as well. So that was where my journey took me.
It's interesting to hear that. And I kind of, unless maybe either of our panelists have something that they wanted to speak to about this, but I want to pick up on something that came up in both of your answers. And maybe we could have the other panelists talk about this a little bit, which is that there are a lot of grad programs. And there are, when you start to look out and you start to realize I recall this from when I was going to grad school, sort of the endless programs that all look like they might make sense, and not being able to figure out what like, what is the right one? Jason, I hear you about getting unsuccessful letters back. I sort of went through that experience as well. But I do think that this is a really important thing for people who are considering grad school, which is like, how did you decide which programs to apply to, and how did you also go through, like, I guess just getting advice? I mean, applying to graduate school, particularly when you're working, can be a very lonely thing, because it's not the sort of thing where you might find yourself, and it can be difficult as a student as well, but it's not the sort of thing that everyone's talking about all the time at the office. And so, yeah.
Oh, can I just jump quickly about that quickly? Why I kind of choose York? Because I think that's the point about the special. I choose York was my number one, so that's why I was like depressed. Oh, York was the hardest one to get into of all the choices, so that's why I was like, oh, they're not going to choose me, and then they were the one. That's why I said, thank goodness, it was my number one choice.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great thing to talk about. We can talk. Yeah, I hope we can get back to that. Yeah.
It was
So.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just saying that because the focus on, like, because I did my area around ecological economics, that's like I was very interested in, and that's like a very niche compared to the environmental economics. And York was the only one that I saw that was kind of like offering those courses and like have professors that talk around that. So I feel like that's also a important aspect why I chose York to go to that.
Right. So the relevance of the faculty. Yeah, no, that's a key one. I mean, yeah. So Rana, do you want to respond as well, or?
Yeah, so I think that in my experience, like my advocacy work and the experiences that I've had around advancing accessibility really allowed me to know what type of area I was looking for with a master's degree. So I knew I was interested in public policy and law. And I completed my bachelor degree in human rights and equity studies. So I decided that a master's in public policy would be a great complement to my education and that background. So in terms of that, because I finished my bachelor degree right before starting my master's, I did some research early on in my, towards the end of my bachelor degree, just to see what types of programs were out there focused on public policy. And I looked at different programs that were related to that area, but also had flexible options in case I wanted to be working at the same time. And I just started looking around, and I began having conversations with professors that I knew would be able to support me throughout the process and bounce ideas off of them. So one of the things I would say is just connect with professors and those that are there to support you, and just engage in as much discussions and coffee chats as you possibly can to learn more about the different options available. Like in particular, my program is meant for working professionals. So there's options out there depending on your life situation, and yeah, just keep exploring and looking around.
Thank you. Harwinder, I don't know if you want to also sort of pick up on any of these themes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, my experience, it was never my plan to get my master's degree and, go back to school. And I didn't even know that you can get your master's in human resources management. I wasn't even aware of this. I feel like the MBA is a lot more publicized. It wasn't until one of my HR professors from my undergrad degree actually spoke about the MHRM program in class one day. And this was a professor that taught in both the undergrad and the graduate program. So he had a lot of great insight on the program. He spoke about the benefits of it, the purpose, campus, the structure. So that really sparked my interest. And just hearing him talk about it from there, I kind of decided to do my own research to see, okay, outside of York, I'm like, of course he's gonna, talk positively about it. He teaches in the York U program. So I wanted to see what other options were out there in terms of getting your master's in HRM, but outside of York. So I did my own research, and I quickly came to the conclusion that there are not a lot of universities that offer that program across Ontario and even across Canada. So it is very limited programs out there to specialize in HRM. And some of the programs that I found, they had a more of a focus on labor relations, which really wasn't my area of interest. So just going back to the York program and finding more information on specifically that MHRM program, I just went onto the York U website, got, further looked into the details. And when I saw kind of the structure and the learning outcomes of that program, it really resonated with me. It was aligned with what I was interested in learning. So that kind of sealed the deal. And from there, I decided to go ahead and apply. And yep, the rest is history.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, just some of the common themes really sound like, so contact with profs in some ways seemed key. Some contact with, just sort of some general sense of the relevance. How many of you, can I ask just a question? How many of you reached out sort of beyond the website? I think my connection is a little bit gumming up, but how have you reached up beyond the website as sort of a layer of contact, and how did that go? So what did you do to sort of make that contact beyond just sort of the information you could find online? Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Actually, I was visiting Ontario in the February before the application statuses were going to be announced. And so I just dropped in and, and took a risk that maybe I'd meet someone, and because I was all the way in BC, right? So I had no option to, kind of meet people and figure out the program in person. I know a lot of people sort of go and attend in person and chat. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to use this opportunity to actually visit and see if I can have some coffee chats or even just speak to the administrative staff, because you can get a lot from just people's experience even of working there. And I got a really good feel for how welcoming the campus was and really what York was all about. So for me, it was trying to understand a little bit more about the campus and the student life. And I think that's a huge component of studying. I know a lot of the questions right now are about statements of interest and applications, but if you are successful in getting in, it's really important to understand if you're going to enjoy campus life and if there's resources there to support you either in your personal or professional goals. So I would definitely look at that component and reach out to other people. And then the other piece I would just suggest is that if other people have attended university that you know of in your friend network or in your personal network, those are also great people to reach out to get their experience, because they'll be really honest with you, as well as in your work environment. If there are some people that you aspire to, those are great people to ask as well.
Yeah, and actually this is something that Rana mentioned also. I think you called it coffee chats, being sort of a really helpful way of sort of building up that information base. And I think one of the things I'd add here that really has sort of come to the fore recently is that virtual meetings are the sort of thing that sometimes really might work with certain programs, is reaching out and email, but especially, if you have specific questions, reaching out to people might make it feasible. If you are, for example, living thousands of kilometers away and a visit to campus is not feasible, but, sort of figuring out sort of when to have that. It's a big commitment, and it really is worth doing that research, even if, once you are accepted, having that conversation a little bit further. I want to delve though, I want to keep delving into this, and this actually sort of echoes some of the questions that have been coming up in the Q&A about preparing applications, and to talk about how to do that. We actually had questions pre-submitted. We've had questions that we were going to ask, what kinds of so my question was, what advice would you provide preparing an application that will help somebody be successful? The second question, which came from somebody, is what do you feel, or how could you, and I can answer it from my perspective, sort of, but what are some of the steps that people engaged in order of maintaining relationships with people in order to get letters of reference or letters of support. There's another question about sort of how do we think about approaching, or how did you approach something like a statement of interest? So a whole host of questions here, and maybe we can sort of start out with just sort of the most general one, which is, what were your guiding principles when you were thinking about putting together your application materials? And we can start here. Again, we'll start with you, Rana, and then we'll move on to a few of the other panelists. So.
Yeah, thank you. So in my experience, what I did when I was first starting out my application, and one of my guiding thoughts was just start early and connect with professors, mentors, and those that support you. And that was a point that I brought up earlier because it makes the process that much easier throughout the whole process, and it makes it a lot easier when you're looking for those reference letters for your application. And once you have that strong relationship with a professor, it will make it a lot easier. Yeah, in terms of that, like I would say keep in touch with those mentors and professors throughout your application process. When writing your statement of interest, having another eye on your letter and proofreading is a good thing to have. And I would say, like, with your statement of interest, because that's a large part of application, I would say focus on having a clear vision of what you want to achieve in the graduate program and why your experiences and knowledge make you an ideal candidate. And I would also say, like, write and put together your application from your heart and showcase your passion, your uniqueness, and lived experience, because you are unique, and the best way to set your application apart is to show that. And yeah, I would just have those guiding principles in mind when you're putting together your application. And I think those principles are able to be applied to different types of programs and different applications.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, something that really, when you sort of said something about, writing your statement in a way that you make clear what your goals are. I think a key part of this actually harkens back to our first conversation here about your goals should really intersect with what that program can do. And I think that, one of the questions about, like, what separates a strong from a weak application, we often treat it as though it's something that, like, our application may be different, right? And there are things that you can do. You can proofread. But one of the things is often that people are going to say, this student, if they come here, will not get what they're looking for, right? And so that's often a really key thing, that is the strongest applications are those where you have a real alignment between what the student wants to accomplish and what the program can provide to that student. And this is also a helpful way of looking at sometimes when things may not be successful outcomes, is also to recognize that, like, it's no good being in a place that you're not going to get what you want. That's just frustrating. And so this is sort of something that I always sort of think about when I read applications, right? Is that if this student comes here, even if I think they're amazing and the most interesting person and I want to be best friends with them, they will be miserable if they come and do their master's here, right? Because this is not the program for them. And that sometimes is something that I think is really important, that you can sort of also sort of do some of that work for yourself. Yeah, I mean, Jason, I don't know. Oh, there's a question that just came up here. Yeah, so one of the questions I think that came up, and maybe Sarah, you can respond to this one, is could you also sort of maybe answer the question generally, but also specifically, how did you think about your professional experience as in terms of prepping? Because you were already in the workforce when you applied. So how did you present that? How did you sort of think about that in the context of preparing an application?
Yeah, so you know what, I think the answer might be really similar to Rana's point of really showing your heart and your uniqueness. So my professional experience really lent itself to demonstrating who I was, because I was, as I said, volunteering and doing a bunch of things, working. So I was able to use that to really paint a picture of who I am and what I want to get out of the program, to your point. So I would say, regardless of if you've got that work experience or not, there are going to be things that you feel really passionate about that are really related to the program, and also things you're passionate about that maybe don't directly relate, but show who you are and where your passions are, just as a human being. So I think when, not that I've reviewed any applications to university, but when I'm doing, even job interviews, part of the process is making sure that they meet some critical criteria, right? So the minimum, your B+ average or your whatever, your GPA. Beyond that, there's a huge pile of people that you now have to, sort of slim down to the ones that are going to get in. So, I don't know how big all of the different programs are, and there's probably variety there, but you have to stand out from the crowd. And some of the representation of who you are personally, but also who you want to be professionally, and obviously through the product of the program, is really important. So I would say, don't get too hung up on writing the perfect application. As long as it speaks to who you are, you're going to be, I think, in really good stead. You don't even necessarily have to be, as Mark just said, the best student ever, because most times with interviews and other things, they're looking for the person who's the best fit, and that's the combination of both of those sides of that I've mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's actually a very fair, I think, description of how actually a lot of the admissions process will work. And I think it will be really helpful for some of the people who are considering applying. There's one more question that I sort of want to pull out here, and maybe Harwinder or Jason, you can speak to this. Rana, you already sort of referred to this a little bit, but as time passes, it can often be difficult to keep in contact with the people who are writing letters. And just sort of what those strategies are. And this can often be the case where maybe you feel like somebody won't remember you, or how do you sort of maintain that connection in a way that is supportive of your long-term professional development? I wonder if you had any tips for that in terms of how you figured that out and how you navigated figuring out who to write those letters of support for you. So we'll start with you, Harwinder. Yeah.
Yeah, so for myself, those letters of support kind of came from a combination of professors, as well as from, because I was working full time, so from my current employer as well. So those are relationships that I kind of maintained, I think, really leveraging social media, specifically LinkedIn. So staying in touch with them through LinkedIn to kind of, because it's kind of awkward to go off and randomly ask for a letter of recommendation, especially if you haven't been in contact with that individual or that professor for some time now. So just doing regular check-ins, just casual conversations from time to time, especially leveraging LinkedIn, I found to be the most useful to maintain that relationship. So when it actually came time to ask for that letter of support, it wasn't an awkward one-off conversation. There was a dialogue that I created, a relationship that I've built. And then I think on the receiving end, that individual also feels more comfortable providing you with that recommendation and that letter of support as well.
So, yeah, that's a great tip. I mean, a lot of these tools like LinkedIn can be very helpful in terms of keeping a connection. I think one of the other things that I always find helpful as a professor is that sometimes be ready to supply information about what you've been up to. Right. Mm-hmm. So maybe I had you in a 3rd year course and you did really well, or a 4th year course, and it's been 2 years and you've gone and done stuff like and be ready in some ways to do something, not just with the CV, but provide some context about what you've been doing. Because the CV will give you sort of a list of line items. And this is sort of, I think, comes back to that point of saying, connection is one thing, but being able to provide sort of details can be really helpful. Jason, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add there. You were in university at the time you applied, right? So how did you sort of think about that process?
Yeah, very different. With myself, it was because I had an easier opportunity in just talking to these professors, because I know I had to have 3 references, and I was actually kind of trying to be strategic in who I was trying to kind of talk to, and who with the professors. It's more of the professors that know me inside, but also outside the classroom, that they can talk different ranges about me, because I had because I was involved in like 2 student organizations. Like I was president of the Business Science Student Association, so I had one of the people that was coordinating the program, that I had a class with this the professor, but also they oversee some of the stuff I did with the student association during that time. Also was like, because I was part of the Public Policy Administration Student Association for 2 years, so I was like very involved with the school of public policy. So I had like the director write my reference letter, because I have done very involved in there, and also had one of the professors that I took a bunch of classes with them. So I was like, I would start going with professors that I know that knew me from like all my classroom work, but also can also talk about the extracurricular work that I've done like the past couple of years. So that was kind of who I was like looking at. Like, I think what will make the best, strongest, probably that. Oh, sorry. Who will like shed light like all aspects of me, because I feel like that's like a very important aspect. And like who you're asking your references, like they can talk about all these different aspects of you, and maybe just beyond the classroom, all this stuff, you're like involved at the university and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I was with the references, how I was looking at it, of who to ask.
Yeah, so I think it's, I mean, there's 2 things that I think really strike me about what you're saying. I mean, the first is, and this comes back to that notion about letting the person who's writing for you know about a fuller picture, if there's a fuller picture that you want them to understand. They may have seen a sort of thin sliver of you in a seminar, but if you're active in different activities that intersect with your education in different ways, let them know and let them understand what those are. I think the other thing is also to think a little bit about that balance, right? That a mediocre letter, or somebody who you don't really know, even if they're very, very well known in a field, may not be doing as much work for you in terms of how that application works, as much as somebody who can really speak to you in detail, even if they may not be sort of the most senior professor in the field. And I think that thinking about that can be really key. And I think, so Jason, you were sort of saying you balanced the 2 out, that you had somebody who was very senior, but then someone who was junior. And I think that sort of, the chemistry of the 2 can be key. Because what you don't want is somebody who writes a sort of, who can't really speak to who you are and what you did, right? That can sort of say, looking back on my records, Mark attended classes regularly and submitted assignments. I mean, that's true, but it's not a glowing recommendation about why I should continue in graduate school. And I think that, you know, something like this is really to think about sort of how those connections were built. I think the other thing to keep in mind, and this is a point that I make to students, which is so important now, is even if the person has moved on from where you took the course with them, you can follow up with them wherever they've gone. Right. And this is sometimes might take a little bit more work. People are at maybe you can't, like, so if you came to York, people have moved to other schools. So I've taught at 4 universities since my career started. I have students from my first university who still chase me down sometime for letters if they're going back to school like 7 years later. Right. And that's cool with me. So don't think because they've changed their job that they've forgotten about sort of the people that they taught. So sometimes that might take a little bit of extra legwork of finding the extra email. I did once have a student contact me on Instagram, which was a little bit weird, but it was the only way he could figure out how to find me. So that happens as well. I guess I wasn't on my LinkedIn profile long enough, taking to Harwinder's point. So these are, I think that these are all sort of really useful points. And I think that they come back in different ways to, I think, some of the questions that we're starting to see in the chat as well. You know, in terms of my questions, you know, I have sort of some big picture questions, but I actually sort of want to integrate a little bit some of the other questions that have been coming up in the chat. So Arthur asked the question here that I think is quite interesting about thinking about how to write a statement of intended research for an MA application. How do you write a statement of interest? And I'd like maybe if each of you could maybe speak a little bit to this, recognizing that each of your programs is actually quite different probably in what they're expecting. And so the first caveat I'm going to say, and I hope this doesn't interfere with anything that anybody's going to say, is look at what your program is asking for. Right? So that's probably the first part. But within that, you know, sort of like, so the question that the person asks is, so would displaying comprehension of high-level topics in your field, summarizing or reflecting, be better than trying to discuss what you're interested in doing? The question is also, could you provide an example of overthinking? But maybe I could sort of broaden that out to say sort of, what did you find most difficult about writing your statement of interest? So let's start with Sarah. Let's start with you because we haven't heard from you in a little bit. So yeah.
So I'm going to caveat this by saying that I did not do a research-based program, so I didn't have to do a statement of intended research. But I think my answer would be very similar to before. You know, you have to represent in part your interest and alignment with the program once again, right? So I think the question maybe demonstrates a little bit of overthinking in and of itself, in that you're trying to find the perfect topic. I think probably you're best suited by picking a topic that speaks to you and what you want to get out of the program, perhaps by combining in something that you know is one of those broader concepts that you need to demonstrate the knowledge of. So maybe a hybrid of the two approaches. Yeah, as I didn't have to do that particular portion, maybe I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think most applications, they tend to have some kind of discussion, even if it's usually may not be as research focused. But yeah, you're right. I think that, I mean, that speaks, I think, to what I was thinking there, which is to say, really look at what they're asking for and think about the context that the program's entering into. I mean, I'm presuming in your program, if you had written out a thesis research-based project, they would have been like, I'm not sure if this is exactly what we're looking for. Does anybody else want to speak to this in terms of how you approach that, maybe the statement part of your proposal? Your application. Sorry about that. Jason, yeah.
Yeah, I can go, because like I did a research master's program. So I think that was the most difficult part with me. I was overthinking because I said I had to be different from people. Like it was like this mindset, like I don't want to feel like I can't be basic with my research topic. And it was just like, that was the most difficult part for months, like for the 1 month before the deadline. And I think it was with me, I kind of come up with it because after it was, I was taking a class, environmental policy, and we were doing topics, and I think we were still focusing on NAFTA and the environmental protections related to NAFTA. I was like, oh, this is actually interesting. And I don't think no one is actually talking about that. And I think it was during 2016 where like, a lot of this stuff was happening, especially NAFTA, with Trump coming in saying he would probably rip it out and all these provisions and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, and I didn't realize about like how NAFTA can actually affect environmental protections. It's like, oh, this is actually interesting, and looking into that different aspects and like how we can go into it. And I think we're just taking that class and hearing and like a lot of the international development stuff, where people were talking about like Trump and how that's going to be relations to Canada. And I said, oh, this is kind of interesting to see. Like, and I don't think a lot of people knew about that. So it's like that was like just taking that one class. And I'm like, oh, you know, I'll do my research around this.
And I think that's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, you are trying to do this thing where you are trying to distinguish yourself. But I think what also I take from your story is like, it's the thing you were also interested in, right? That no, if you wanted to write, you could write a very dynamic proposal, but if it's not who you are, right? That proposal isn't going to sort of cohere into something that makes sense. It's also, I mean, here's the truth of it. You're going to find yourself on the ground in a program working with people that you don't want to work with because it's not what you're interested in. So I think like it's an interesting way to think about those two, right? That everything feels, or you can make many topics very engaging if that's the thing you're engaged in, right? That's sort of so key. Harwinder, I saw that you unmuted before, so I'm going to throw to you.
Yep. So for my program, I also just had to write a statement of interest. It wasn't research-based. So another thing that kind of just came to my mind, aside from pointing out, how the program aligns with what you're interested in learning, you can think of it more high level than that, and how this program fits into your career development and what you're looking to get out of the program from a career standpoint, and how that's going to help you long term in terms of what you're looking to achieve. So not just learning based, but looking at it holistically, across your other goals in your career development that you're working towards as well.
Thank you. So we just had a really great question come into the chat from Linda, and it says, "How did you deal with any feelings of self-doubt or imposter syndrome during the application process?" And how did you overcome these feelings? Sarah, I'm going to pick on you because you were nodding. So, so we're going to go. So if I hope that's okay, but I don't know if you want to share something.
Yeah, of course. I feel like we're in a bit of a cycle and I'm answering first, so maybe pick on someone else next time. It's all good. No, you know what? And I think it's a great question. I have feelings of imposter syndrome 100% of the time, pretty much. Like I'm a senior manager for the Canadian Red Cross, and there are moments, even in my current job, where I am, I would say, relatively accomplished, and I have a professional degree and lots of experience now, almost 20 years of experience. And there are still moments where I have imposter syndrome. So really, there's one thing that you take away from this answer. Please keep trying. If you have a passion for it and you want to be in grad school, then don't stop trying. There is a place and you will find it. And as Mark was pointing out earlier, it's about the faculty also feeling that that's a good place for you based on what your passions are as well. So finding that best fit, keep trying. You can also take a break from applying and do some other stuff to kind of enhance your profile as well. I actually started applying a year before I got in, and then kind of a couple of years later ended up actually going to grad school, partly because I wasn't necessarily getting the admissions that I wanted, and I wasn't necessarily 100% sure about the ones that had offered me a place. So just persevere through the rejections. I know it's demoralizing and it can be really hard. Develop your own strategies for dealing with that, whether it's going out with your friends or, going for a walk and just reconnecting with nature or whatever it is that really helps your spirit feel, alive again after just, some of those rotten rejection letters. But, keep trying because it happens throughout your career. It's not just for grad school.
Yeah, and this actually speaks to a question a little bit earlier that I think that Danae also asked about, like, what would you suggest if you don't get in right after your BA? And I think that could be those are some really helpful tips, right? To sort of to stay connected. Yeah, I don't know if did anyone else want to take up that question around imposter syndrome?
I can go because
Sure,
I feel it even. I feel like even now to this day, I even feel like it during when I was applying to grad school. Am I qualified? Like I'll be like, am I qualified enough? Do I feel like it was? I feel like I felt like I wasn't like ready, and it was like, and even like after I graduate, even during grad school, I feel like I did not belong in grad school during the time, and I think it was just this mindset of just having in my head, and I feel like. It was just something that always happened, even graduated from school, even when I was graduated, like working full time. I also seem to have that imposter syndrome happen with me as well. And I feel it's always something you just gotta get in your head. And I feel like it's unfortunately sometimes it will happen even during your career. It's just like just dash it away, just forget about it, just like know your worth. I think that's the thing is say just know your worth. Don't just like look down and think you're like you don't belong here. I think that was like a big part of me during grad school. I think I was like feeling that a lot during the 2 years in that regard. And it's just like get over it, all that kind of stuff. It's just like, yeah, it was just like something I had to like work on. Even like now, like it was like with when I was working at EcoSource, it was like, do I really should be here, or should I be in like coordinator like this youth program, like me overseeing this stuff, like am I not qualified for and it was like, did I fake the interview? Was I good? I faked it. It was like this kind of stuff I was like thinking in my head during the time. So it's just like it tends to happen. I feel like it's just you just like knowing your worth and stop getting into your head about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like now it can be told. Yes, and indeed, I still experience that same sort of feeling from time to time. But I do want to come back, though, I think, to something, Jason, you said at the very beginning of today's panel, to circle back around imposter syndrome, that one of the key things around it, getting over it or thinking it through on your own can be really difficult. But having a network and a community of people that you can talk to about it can be so important. because then it turns from just something that like is happening to you to something that you can sort of contextualize and say, this thing happened. And sometimes, honest to goodness, strange things will happen and it might not make sense. But I think that that's really sort of something to really build on, is that connection with others can be really important, whether it's professors, whether it's friends, whether it's colleagues in your work environment. This network will really help you think about and understand sort of that relationship. The last question here is I think one in the Q&A, and I'll just turn to it, and then I have sort of two big takeaway questions, and I realize we're getting close on time, is a question about sort of balancing, and maybe this is one that might be difficult for the panelists to answer. What would be your advice about gaining experience here in Canada or going back to school for a PhD? And so you're an international student currently finishing a second master. And this is really a tough question, I think, because the specifics of field and the specifics of experience and one's context make this an answer that there isn't going to be one answer. It's going to depend on where you find yourself in terms of what your professional plans are, what your academic goals are, how you're thinking about which institutions you want to go to. And I understand that this might not be a clear answer, or the answer that you're seeking. I think, though, that this comes back to points that have been raised by the panelists today, which is about reaching out to a network again, to sort of drawing on whether it's professors, whether it's people who are in professional sectors that you're interested in pursuing, and getting a sense of how they understand the landscape as well. Because again, an individual decision can be really hard to make because you don't have that context. You're not, you can't know your future. And so knowing people who are further down the path can be really helpful for understanding where you currently find yourself. I hope that helps, but I do think that this is the sort of thing where building out and having conversations, even with graduate program directors, about what a program can offer, and previous international students who've been in similar circumstances might be helpful. So maybe that's not so much an answer as the beginning of a series of questions you can sort of take up. So here's, I had two takeaway questions, but I'm going to ask you one big takeaway question. And I realized we've got about a minute left, which is to say, what do you wish you knew before you started graduate studies? What do you wish you knew about graduate studies before you started? One thing. So we'll start. Harwinder, you've not started on any questions yet, so let's start with you.
Yeah, for sure. I think I would strongly recommend looking into the structure of the program, because if you are planning to work full-time and go to school full-time, there are programs that allow for that and certain ones that don't. For me personally, that was a major concern for me. I wanted to continue working full-time while going to school. So really ensuring that the program offerings would work with my schedule. And for the MHRM program at the time, it was primarily weekend courses. So it worked really well for someone working full-time Monday to Friday. So that's something I would strongly recommend doing if you know you're going to be juggling multiple priorities.
Great, thank you. That's wonderful. Rana, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess one of the things that I wish I knew before starting graduate studies, and I guess it has to do with the pandemic, but other than the pandemic, was just the amount of changes that things we're going to go through during this time, and just being able to go with the flow. And I know when I applied for my master's, it was before the pandemic, and when I started, it was during the pandemic. So I had a clear vision in my mind at the very beginning when I was applying on how things were going to end up going, and I had that set plan, and I knew exactly what my next steps were going to be. And suddenly the pandemic came, and I had to learn how to be more flexible and just use those changes to my advantage. And in the end, it ended up all for the best, because I took on opportunities that I wasn't expecting I was going to take on, and it changed the trajectory that I was going in, but I'm still going in the same path, just in a different way than I expected. So yeah, just being open-minded to the changes is something that I would tell myself.
What a positive and inspiring approach to many of the more difficult things that have come up in the last 18 months. So yeah, and I think, you know, we can think about how that is something that we can move forward with. Jason, and then we'll go to Sarah after that. Jason.
I would say, because when I applied, I thought like going back to the research intent thing, I thought I was stuck with that for like, that's when I go to school, that's when I'm going to be doing research. For the full year, first year, I thought I was like, I thought I can't change it. And it was like, my professor was like, yeah, you can change it. I said, oh, really? So I was just like because it was like, and I think also because I think the professors were very interested in the research, like looking at NAFTA and the environmental implications and like corporate power that kind relates to that. And there are a lot of times they were very interested in that, but I was like, I do not want to talk about Donald Trump. In my research, I'm just like, I don't want to talk about him. And I was like, I want to do something else because they were very interested, like, oh yeah, Trump's been elected. Oh, he's gonna destroy these environmental stuff. And so like, I really don't want to talk about that clown, to be honest, in my research. And I kind of want to talk about something else. And that's like, and then when I was taking other courses, or like, oh, can I actually switch into this? Can I like change my research? Focus on like ecological economics, because I was more interested in like human well-being, connecting to the environment, and how that also relates to like corporate power to that. And they're like, yeah, you can switch into that. And I think that I wish I didn't switch a whole year to actually I can change my research into that. So I kind of wish I didn't know that I can switch. And I think that was the mindset, like, oh, this is what I applied for. I'm sticking to this research topic. And I'm like halfway through it, I was like, yeah, I want to switch. I don't want to talk about this man.
Yeah, it's a good tip. Like, I think to realize that programs evolve over time. I was going to say that this is what happened to many people with the pandemic, and then throw to Sarah, except I realized that in disaster emergency management, they've been thinking about pandemics on a regular basis for a long
like
time.
Every day.
Yes. So what would be your takeaway? Yeah.
I think that the biggest thing for me, which I sort of understood coming into the program, but didn't really fully realize, is that the program is really what you make of it. Obviously, there's a baseline of academic learning that's been kind of a theme, you know, even on the application, there's that baseline application eligibility requirement. But just like that in the program, it's really up to you how much value you want to sow into it. And, you know, kind of that old cliche saying of you get out what you put in is so true. You know, I was able to both myself and observe other people really using that experience and all of the resources that York can provide in this case to really make the experience just like even more than it can be just by default. So things like getting involved in student politics, like Jason is doing, getting involved in the student association. We even put together some like professional kind of meet and greet night so that we could actually meet people from disaster and emergency management in the profession. And they were really willing to come and talk. So we did that kind of in partnership with the association. We were able to attend conferences. Like as a student, you get a really good rate. Like there's all of this other stuff that you can do to really enrich the experience. So highly recommend doing that. I wish I'd known that coming in, but we definitely still took advantage of it through the program. So that's what I would take away.
These are all great points, and I would second every one of them. So that is the end of our discussion for now. So I want to thank all four of our panelists. So Rana, Jason, Harwinder, and Sarah, thank you so much for taking time from your very busy days to come and talk with us and sharing your insights and experiences. So thank you all. And to our attendees, you know, please feel free to share your talk with your friends, your acquaintances, anybody really. It will be posted on the York Alumni YouTube channel, and you may also join our LinkedIn group or follow us on Facebook by searching for York University Alumni, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Feedback, and I think they can provide more information in the chat around those. Feedback about this or any of our programming is welcome and can be sent to us, sent to the alumni team on social channels or at the address alumni@yorku.ca. And right now, here's a sort of something that the alumni team is starting to launch, which is York U's Top 30 Changemakers Under 30 program. And I think this is something that Rana had participated in. It's currently accepting nominations. The Top 30 program aims to recognize inspiring and diverse alumni aged 29 years and younger who are championing equity, diversity, and inclusion, working across all sectors and making meaningful differences in their communities. You can nominate a York grad now until October 18th. And for more information, please visit alumniandfriends.yorku.ca. And this is in the chat now. Actually, the address is slightly different, but it's in the chat. Thank you all once again for attending today's event. The next gratitude session is on young alumni speed networking and is coming up on October 14th. So keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation. I look forward to seeing you there. Be well. We wish you good health and all the best in your future applications to graduate school.